Welcome to the Intentional Encourager podcast, where each episode brings you compelling conversations and stories designed to entertain, enlighten, and encourage. And now here's your host, Brian Sexton.
Hey everybody, Brian Sexton. I am intentionally encouraged when I see people doing business the right way. And for the last 15 years, Damon Burton and his team at SEO National have done just that. Now you might say, Brian, what can they do for me in my business? I'm going to tell you what they can do for you. They can help you understand search engine optimization. There are a lot of players out there in the marketplace, but you want a team of people that are going to be dedicated to working with you and helping you to understand search engine optimization and how you can show up higher on search engines so that you can bring more revenue into your business. Damon and his team are full of integrity, honesty, decency, and trust. And if that's important to you and that encourages you, I would encourage you to give them a call today at 855-736-6285 or go to SEOnational.com and get a free quote and tell them you heard about it on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Get ready for a dynamite conversation coming up right now on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
And welcome into the Intentional Encourager podcast. I'm your host, Brian Sexton. Thank you for joining us again today. I have a great treat for you today. My friend, Jim Butler. Now, Jim is a unique individual. He's a business owner in West Virginia, owns his own excavating company. But Jim is a much more than that. We're going to get into that. Jim has been a former House of Delegates member in the state of West Virginia. For those of you not familiar with our political system, that is our House of Representatives, so to speak. So Jim has served in the House of Delegates and is poised and on track to go back again this January 2023. And it is an honor today. Jim is also a United States Marine Corps veteran. And so, again, we thank him for his service. But we're going to have a two-part conversation this morning. This morning, we're going to get into Jim's beliefs, and we're going to talk about the state of current affairs. In the second part of this conversation, we're going to talk about Jim's story and his life and his service. So it's my honor to welcome my friend Jim Butler to the Intentional Encourager podcast. Jim, how are you this morning?
Doing great, and great to be here, and thanks for the invitation.
Listen, you and I have talked. It's my honor. You and I have talked numerous times. I have filled in, as most people know here, and Tom's been a guest on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Your friend and mine, Tom Roten, who does a morning talk show in our area, you've been on gobs of times with Tom, and how you and I got connected was through a friend of ours who's been a guest on this podcast, Marshall Wilson. I was hosting one morning, and I'd had you on once before, and Marshall said, You've got to have Jim on. He needs to talk about what you're talking about. And I said, well, I had Jim's number, and then I lost your number, but we got reconnected through that. Service is very important to you. So let's start there. And we talk about the buzzword is the ways to serve a community and things like that. And service is very important to you, obviously, with your Marine Corps background and things like that. I want to go here to start our conversation. Why is service, in your mind, seeming to be slipping among our society today? Because you go to a restaurant, and I know they're scrambling for employees and things like that, and you hear people say, well, the service just wasn't as good as it was this last time. Or you go to the grocery store or things like that. From your prism, Jim, why do you think service is slipping in our society today?
Wow, that's a great question. I suppose it's probably partly because we have this sense of entitlement in our country now. People think that they're entitled to free everything. They're entitled to free education. They're entitled to free food, free housing. And I think that people oftentimes think they're entitled to a job where, even as a small business owner myself now, I'm appreciative of any job that I can get. And actually I have been blessed. I've had to turn down a lot of work recently, but it's very difficult to turn work down because I'm so appreciative of someone even asking me to do the work. So I think a lot of it is just the attitude that our country have, and especially our young people, that they're entitled to a lot of things. even the term entitled is not something that I heard a whole lot when I was growing up, and you probably didn't either. But now it's, everyone's entitled to everything, it seems like.
Well, Jim, as we record this podcast, I am up in the Buffalo, New York area. I'm about 20 minutes away from, as we record this podcast, a couple of Saturdays ago, there was a horrific shooting at a Tops grocery store up here, and you still see reminders in the community. And I was watching the news, or actually I was eating lunch yesterday after I got in here, and they were talking about the last of the 10 people that had been shot and killed in that grocery store was laid to rest yesterday. And again, as we record this in the first day of June in 2022, so I'm going to kind of timestamp this a little bit. But again, I love what you're saying there is that the folks that work at that grocery store will never be the same. Some of them may decide, hey, I'm not going to work here anymore. I want to do something different. I want to go somewhere else and work, And in that case, it's understandable because they might have witnessed something horrific and things like that. But you're exactly right. My dad always taught us, and I want to get your perspective on it. My dad always said, if somebody does something for you, you say thank you. It didn't matter if I was 10 or if I was 40. I was 40 when my dad died. He was like, hey, son, somebody does something for you, you say thank you. It feels like, Jim, though, I love where you're going with this with entitlement. You have seen that in your role in government where folks feel like we're entitled to this, or they may lobby you as a House of Delegates member and say, now, remember, we're doing this for the children, or we're doing this for that. Why do you think entitlement continues to be so pervasive? Is it because we're just gotten used to entitlement? And maybe I'm not asking that question correctly, but I love where you're going with this about the entitlement piece, because it just feels like we're being told, and I'm not trying to make this political, it's just the way it is from the top down, we should expect a handout. You've seen it at far different levels than I have. How do we put the brakes on entitlement?
Oh goodness, I think to put the brakes on it, we have to have a realistic expectation of what others can do, and in the case of talking about my service in the House of Delegates and other forms of politician, the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House, is candidates. We've done this to ourselves to a large extent. You get someone running for office and trying to get elected, and you promise the world, and you say, I'm going to fix this and I'm going to fix that. And even, coming down to the whole COVID thing, I think this was a lot of the reason we ended up doing masks, which we all know are pretty certain that, the evidence shows were not effective, and even the vaccines were not as effective as they promised. But from a political point of view and a social point of view, our leaders, people running for office, promise to fix everything. We promise to keep you healthy. So when a pandemic comes up, then you expect us to do something. Or from my point of view here, we have, during my campaign, roads was a big issue. So I talked to people, I'm going to try to prioritize spending toward fixing our roads. I'm very careful not to promise to fix our roads, because I know that is not realistic. All I can do is work with the other 133 legislators to do these types of things. So I think kind of bringing it full circle, I think that people feel entitled because they have a lot of unrealistic promises made to them every 2 years, or even more frequently than that.
Jim, I love what you said there, because, and we've got a lot of salespeople, we've got a lot of business leaders that listen to the podcast. And you just hit on something really important there. You hit on the promises of trying to get elected, or the promises that a lot of salespeople make in trying to get business, or the promises that people make. Hey, if you'll stay with our company, we'll give you a X amount of dollar raise. We don't want you to leave. They're right. Promises that we make that we make them and hope we have to kick that can down the road, instead of doing what my dad always, and I refer to my upbringing. My dad always told me, if you say it, own it. And I wrote that in my book. If you say, my dad would always say, if you say it, own it. And my dad would punish me more for lying than he would for getting into a fight or anything like that, because my dad valued people's word. And Jim, I love what you said there. When you entered politics, I'm going to go here for a second. When you entered politics, did it surprise you that people would tell you, now you've got to say certain things and you've got to do certain things to get elected? Did it surprise you, or did you kind of go into the process with your eyes wide open to those things?
Well, I guess it surprised me to some extent. I never had anyone saying you need to promise this or you need to promise that, but we went to candidate training, and actually the West Virginia Farm Bureau did the job of doing candidate training back when I first ran, and I don't think they do this anymore in West Virginia, but to be careful about the things that you talk about, because remember that someone who's involved in politics and knows all the details, I think they said 8% or something like that. They said most people don't follow politics. They don't know anything about policy. So don't try to talk to them about detail. Don't try to talk to them about the big issues like human liberty and personal property rights and all those types of big constitutional type issues. They said talk to them about jobs, talk to them about putting more money in their paycheck and those types of things. So, and in the 5 or 6 races I've ran, and now you see this repeatedly, and politicians taught to do is to almost talk down to constituents rather than trying to bring them up and help them to understand the issues and the things that we can really do to make things better.
I love what you said there, and again, the interactions that I've had with you over the last few years. You don't strike me as a talk down to kind of person, and I say that as a compliment, because I've always known you to be very effective in your words, very easily understood in your words. That anybody who listens to you speak understands what you're saying, and I think a lot of times, Jim, and I love what you said there. We do this in business. We do this in politics. We do this in a lot of things, is we try to overcomplicate something, or what I would say is we try to dazzle people with our fancy verbal footwork. Instead of just coming out and saying, here's what I mean, here's what I say, and I bring the two together for clear communication. And to me, that's so, I love what you said there about, let's not talk to people about what really matters. Let's talk to people about what we think matters, jobs,
right.
Put more money in their paycheck. Listen, I've said this.
Hey everybody, Brian Sexton. Prices are going up by the day. We've got to find ways to increase our household revenue. Now, a couple ways you could do that is, one, you could go and ask your boss for a raise. But if that doesn't work, I've got another way for you. It's my friend Joe Hart's program called Products for Profit. Joe's been a guest here on the Intentional Encourager podcast and told his story about how learning retail arbitrage changed his life, and he's been helping thousands of people change theirs. Now, retail arbitrage is simply this. It's taking a product and buying it and then reselling it online for a higher price, and you keep the profits. And guess what? Amazon and Walmart use third-party resellers every day to fulfill their customer orders. I want you to go to productsforprofit.com or productsforprofit.card.co. Get connected to Joe's team. Tell them you heard about it on the Intentional Encourager podcast and start making money today with Products for Profit. And now let's get back to more great conversation on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Jim, and I want to get your take on this. I have said this a lot of times, and I'll say it again here. My provision doesn't come from Charleston, West Virginia. My provision doesn't come from Washington, D.C. There is no government leader that called me this morning and said, Brian, would you please go to work today? Would you please get up and go to work today so you can pay your taxes and do the things you need to do. Because I know at the end of the day, Jim, and this is no slight to you or the other members of the House of Delegates in the state of West Virginia, all good men and women in their own right to some degree, and I know many of them, as obviously you know many of them. But if we're waiting on promises from anybody, I don't care if it's your employer or anybody, if you're waiting on those promises to be able to do what you need to do, you're going to be waiting a long time. And I think we've forgotten the important things of life. We've forgotten that really what's important is what guys like you went and fought for: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yes.
So why is it, and I want to get your take here if I could for just a minute, why is it that it feels like that people are moving away from politics? We're sick of politics. Is it because people are that some politicians are trying to overspeak their constituents and say things over their heads? Or what you're on the inside. What do you hear from folks as to their disdain for the political process?
Well, most of the people who talk to me about politics are on the conservative side of the spectrum, probably like the people you're talking to, but I think this is true on both sides, even on the liberal side. But for conservatives that I speak to, I hear things like, "We really worked hard to get a Republican majority. We really worked hard to get this." Sometimes it's an individual elected. So we really worked hard to do these things.
Hey,
and
Jim, I trip over my own feet verbally a lot of times. Don't worry about it.
Okay. But, people say we really worked hard, or we put ourselves out on the line, or even just something as simple as putting a campaign sign out in the yard and saying that you're a good person, that you're going to do what you say you're going to do. And then we let them down continuously. And I think part of that is because we overpromise. We think we're going to be able to do a lot of things, and we get elected and we realize the opposition is tougher than what we thought. And then other times I think it's because we purposely, and I definitely try not to do this, but we purposely in some cases promise that we're going to fix things or make things better for people, knowing that once you get into that Capitol building, and in Charleston it's this way, and I can't imagine how it must be at the U.S. Capitol, but that really the people calling the shots in many cases are the lobbyists who are getting exactly what they want.
Yeah, and I had a conversation with somebody recently about that same thing, and they were complaining about something, and I said, you have to understand, it's way above you. It's that particular entity got the right to lobby at the state level. It wasn't anything in our state. It was people coming to that particular state capitol and lobbying over that issue. And I love what you said there, Jim. And that's why I wanted to have you on the podcast, because you break things down so simply. And I've always admired that about you. You are a very simple, not a simple man, but you state things to where everybody can understand them. And Jim, and I'm not trying to make this political. I want you to kind of understand why you may be feeling some of the frustrations you may be feeling. You say, well, Brian, it's supposed to be about encouragement. It is. Understanding opens up encouragement. If you understand you can do something, or you understand something, you're encouraged better. If I knew how to fix a car, I'd be more encouraged to fix a car. If I knew how to run a bulldozer like Jim does, I'd be more encouraged to do more dozer work. I'm not trying to compete with him. I'm just saying doing it on the side. But Jim, I feel like, and I love where you've taken us today in this conversation, because we've got to get back, even in our government, about doing things simply to help the people understand the process. Instead, it feels like there's more rhetoric and things like that. There's more rhetoric than results and things like that. And so let me go here for just a second. I'll pivot here for just a second. When you think about the gravity of serving the people, your constituents, take me through a typical day in Jim Butler's life around serving your constituents and things like that. I know when you're in the state of West Virginia, our legislature is in session for 60 days from the middle of January to the middle of March. And so we have part-time legislators here that have businesses and have jobs and families and things like that. When you're in session, take me through a typical day in the life of Jim Butler, because I don't think many people understand a day in the life of a public servant.
Okay. Well, that's interesting that and you're correct to break it down to during the 60-day legislative session, and then the time that we're not in session, it's completely different. But during the session, we're basically at the Capitol every day. We can be there even Saturdays and Sundays. Typically in the beginning, we're not though. But so you show up in the morning, and usually you have an early committee meeting where you have 25 people in a committee, and you talk about an issue. And again, we're getting back to where the lobbyists have a lot of influence there, because the lobbyists are on the same schedule that those of us who are serving are. So they're actually sitting in the committee meetings with us, and they're not participating in the committee meeting per se, in the sense that voting and so forth, but they can be called as witnesses, and they can catch us as we're going into a meeting or something like that. So you have, a special interest groups, and a special interest group is not necessarily a bad thing. It could be a special interest group, for a pro-life issue per se, which I would call a good group. But you can also have the people on the opposite side, the pro-abortion side on there. So all of us are influenced as we walk in the meeting room to consider legislation. And we're influenced by these people as they're called up to testify sometimes, and when we vote, we are influenced by these same special interest groups, the lobbyists. They'll pat us on the back, say we appreciate your vote on that, or if you vote against them, then they say, we're going to work to defeat you next time. Sometimes, so
well, and Jim,
so
those things can get tense. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'm sitting there thinking as you were talking, that can create some tension in your day. You've already heard from your constituents, maybe when they saw you in the grocery store, or they saw you somewhere, and people do come up to you, I would assume, quite a bit when you're out, and say, hey, what about this or what about that? So you've got all these things you're carrying in your mind anyway, and you've got people then that basically, for all intents and purposes, are going, hey, let me hijack 10 minutes of your time here to talk about my issue and things like that. And forgive me for interrupting. It just strikes me as it seems like a lot to carry, and we haven't even gotten to probably, 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning in a typical day?
Right. Right, and that's the case, and I'm glad you brought up that people talk to us in the grocery stores, because that's what I expect anyway, and I hope all my fellow legislators expect that, is to be interrupted when we're at the grocery store, or even at church. When I go to church, people say, "Oh, I'm sorry to talk to you about this at church," and I say, "Hey, that's why I'm here. We all sign up for this." But going back to the typical day, assuming you want to go there, is so after the committee meeting, then. Normally we're all on 6 or 7 committees or something like that. So we finish that committee meeting, we vote on an issue, and it either passes or fails. And if it passes, it goes on to the floor, where it can actually be passed by the whole legislature. But so we have that first meeting in the morning, and then we go to the second meeting, and the second meeting might be about roads, or it's a different issue. And you have the same type of thing going on. You have lobbyists, in your ear, or sitting next to you, trying to influence you to vote a certain way. And also during the day, we have caucus meetings. We have the Republican group will get together and talk about what our agenda might be and where we are on issues. And the Democrats, I'm sure they're doing the same thing. So I guess the thing I wanted to kind of bring out in all of that is, and this is where I really strive to be different, is when you get in that Capitol building for those 60 days, we're almost we're inundated, and we're almost isolated from the people we represent. And I think sometimes people forget. It's easy to forget who you really represent. And you get the sense that, hey, I'm representing this person from this whatever association, this lobbying group. rather than representing the old lady that you talk to at church on Sunday. So,
I would have to think too that what people don't see as well too is the sacrifices that your family makes to be able to have you do what you do, because and here's the society that we're in today, Jim. The society we're in today is they talk about you on TV, they talk about you on the radio, they talk about you on social media, and you may be out front on a controversial issue and you may be on the other side, but you feel strongly and purposefully, no, I don't want to support this. I'm not comfortable supporting this, whatever that issue may be. And then your family has to hear about it, and other people hear about it. I'm assuming here. I'm just knowing bits and pieces of people that I know that have served in the same capacity that you have served in and will serve again in the future. How do you keep you talk about isolation, and I love that. I don't think people really think about that. So let's talk about it from this perspective. How do you keep your family isolated from the work that you're trying to do for the people to where it's not affecting them and it's not affecting them emotionally or physically or things like that? How do you put that separation in place for your family?
Oh, great question. I suspect that other legislators handle this differently, but I have never isolated my family from what's going on with me. My kids now are 18 and 21 years old, but they were young. They were 10, 12 years old when I first ran for office, and even younger than that when I first got involved in politics. And I've always talked with my children about issues, and my wife has been politically active, and she understands the issues. So if I have a good or a bad day, I come home and I talk with my family, even when the kids were young, about the committee meetings and the kind of decisions that we're making. And they understand what's going on, and they understand that sometimes I'm going to catch some heat for the decisions I make. And I've always told my kids too that I don't expect them to agree with me, but I would appreciate if they do disagree, that they explain why. And I'm actually getting their perspective, another way of looking at it if they do disagree. But most of the times, once I explain the reasons I'm making decisions that I am, then most of the time they do agree. And my daughter, being 18 years old now, she's considering a profession in law as a child advocate or something like that, and maybe even getting into lobbying at some point. And my son is at the U.S. Naval Academy, so they both have pretty. They have different personalities, but they're both pretty solid on what they believe, and have become great adults.
Hey everybody, Brian Sexton. Dreams are powerful pieces of intentional encouragement. We all have them. If you're a business owner, you've probably always dreamed of taking your sales to levels you've never seen before. I've got a guy that can help you with that. His name is Brad Norwood. My good buddy Brad has been on the Intentional Encourager podcast as a guest before, and he is a dream specialist. His company, Dream It Pro, offers incentive packages to travel to places such as the Masters, Kentucky Derby, the Super Bowl, even exotic places that you've always wanted to take your team, but you just didn't know how to do it. Brad's your guy. And oh, by the way, Brad's a certified bucket list coach, so he can help your team members achieve their personal dreams as well. I want you to go to www.dreamitpro.com and find out more, or call him directly at 479-466-6907. And by the way, tell him you heard it on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Let's get back to more great conversation here on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Jim, let me ask you this, and again, I started to go here. I was thinking about what you were talking about, but I want to go here real quick. How do you encourage people to believe in the political process when what we see around us can cause discouragement, very easily could cause discouragement? Let me shelve that for just a minute. Forgive me. I'm throwing you a curveball. I apologize, but
All
I
right.
think you can hit it. You've taken enough questions from Tom Roten over the years. You can handle just about anything. Let me ask you this: if I said, Jim Butler, I'm going to put you in the White House for a day, and you could fix anything you wanted to fix, you could do anything that you wanted to do. You've got 24 hours to try to make as much impact as you can. Where are you starting? And would it be, most people would say, well, put me in there. I'll do a better job than whoever's in there. I don't know that people would really want that responsibility. But if I said, Jim Butler, you've got 24 hours to make an impact, where are you starting?
Oh, wow. That's a humongous question. I think where a lot of our presidents have fallen short, I guess, so where I would try to be different is I would try to involve people in the process and maybe do a better job of educating people about the things we're talking about right now. Our founding fathers were incredible, and I do think that they were inspired by God to come up with our founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, and then our Constitution. So, and I think that if we followed the Constitution, if at all levels of government, if we followed our Constitution, that things would be so much better, and people would not be so frustrated, even because they would be involved in the decisions that are made on their behalf, and they would know that we're following the rule of law rather than following the rule of whoever has the most political campaigns. And I'm kind of throwing you a curveball here now. I think that a lot of the reason we have these the recent mass shootings and things like that, and big problems in society, a lot of the destructive protests and those types of things are because people are so frustrated because they don't feel like they're being heard or that they are involved. That we have this concept in West Virginia, but also obviously the U.S. of equal justice under the law. Equal justice under the law. That doesn't mean you put one group in front of the other. It means we're all equal. And our founding documents are supposed to guarantee that. And when they don't, then sometimes all you can do is lash out because you have no remedy for your grievance if your leaders are not following your founding documents.
Yeah. No, you led beautifully. You led perfectly right where I wanted to go to finish our conversation, is the frustrations of the people. And you're 100% right. When people don't feel like they're heard, it's like our kids. They start to do things when they don't feel like they're getting paid attention to or things like that. And for a lot of parents, it's a wake-up call to say, well, I've got to do a better job here or this and that. So, Jim, as we finish our conversation, this part of our conversation, what would be your intentional encouragement to folks around believing in the political process? Because, to your point, it's broken. It's fundamentally broken. And I love where you took us there, and you so beautifully transitioned to where I wanted to go anyway. So what would be your encouragement to folks around believing in the ideology of this country as it was founded? One nation under God, indivisible. That's supposed to be in our Pledge of Allegiance, but we're pretty divided. So what encouragement would you have for folks around believing in the political process?
Well, I would say that there are several instances, and you may have to actually look for them or talk with people to get the details, but there are instances where one or two people really do make a positive change, or that you have a group that really brings the focus back to better policy for our state. And I just using myself for an example here, not to toot my own horn too much, but I still am just a typical American, what I'd call a typical American. And that's a good thing. I think, I get up every morning and figure out how I'm going to pay my bills, go to work and raise a family, or, help raise a family along with my wife. And I was able to, at a grassroots level, get involved in politics several years ago, and and win several elections actually, and usually being outspent 2-1, but doing the legwork and out talking with people in the community to get elected. And I've helped a good friend of mine, Jonathan Pinson, and some others to get elected the same way, that where typical people, your common everyday person is out making a difference. And the encouragement, I think, is that as people get more and more involved, then we can make a bigger and bigger impact on the policies and really change things so that government becomes an entity that serves the people rather than an entity. I think a lot of times government now, the people are serving government, where it should be the other way around. Government should be serving people.
Boy, I love that. And again, that's what our founding fathers said is, we are, everybody uses the term public servant, but you're correct. It's more times of the people serving the government rather than the government. I love that. What a beautiful way to end this part of the conversation. Jim, if folks want to get connected with you, if they want to find out, maybe they're listening to us in another state, or we have some folks that listen internationally. What's the best way to get connected with you and just see more of what you're doing to try to make a difference in your community and your world?
Well, probably the easiest is social media. I check Facebook about every day, and my personal page is just simply Jim Butler, and then I have Jim Butler for House of Delegates in the 18th District, because I am still a candidate. I haven't won this election. I won the primaries, but I still have to win the election in November. So again, it's Jim Butler for House of Delegates, 18th District. I don't restrict the posts on there. People can post pretty much whatever they want, and of course, send a message or something like that. And I've always given out my home phone number. It's 304-675-3984. 304-675-3984. And you'd be surprised that you would think a lot of people would call, but not a lot do. And once in a while, I get a positive call, and sometimes I get a negative call, but usually people are respectful.
Well, I can't wait for the second part of our conversation to tell your story. And that's the next episode of the Intentional Encouragement Podcast. Jim, what a pleasure it's been today to have you, and I so appreciate your time.
All right. Glad to be on. Thank you.
My thanks as always to producer Bryce Sexton and technical advisor Matt Means. And of course, the ultimate thanks goes to the Lord Jesus Christ, who provides intentional encouragement every day through his word. If you're not subscribed to the Intentional Encourager podcast, hit the subscribe button wherever you get podcasts so you don't miss an exciting episode where you can get encouraged and stay encouraged. And remember, anyone, anywhere, at any time, any place can be an intentional encourager.